Saludos desde Perú.
Saludos desde Argentina.
Federico, parlo un attimo con te. Dovessi sentirmi, ti ho mandato anche i riassunti delle sessioni, quindi hai tante mail. Buongiorno Maria. Si vede mai grande. Sì. 7 minutes. The session, the next session will start at 3:10 p.m. So we wait some more minutes. Meanwhile, welcome to everyone who is connected yet.
Good afternoon and welcome to the last section of the Valcamonica Symposium, Aesthetic and Semiotic Research of Art. We have 7 communication, but my communication is only an introduction to the subject. And before, there is also Federico Mailand online with us for the other communication. La mia riflessione è una brevissima riflessione, purtroppo senza immagini perché è puramente teorica e quindi mi limiterò anche nel tempo. Il concetto di estetica nell'arte rupestre c'è una lunga bibliografia, in particolare anche il professor Anati ebbe già varie occasioni e modi per organizzare convegni su questo aspetto. La mia comunicazione parte dal concetto di bisogno di arte. Il bisogno di arte che è un bisogno dell'uomo in generale a tutte le latitudini e a tutte le epoche. Ecco, in particolare ho visto che negli ultimi anni la letteratura specifica dell'incendio rupestre si parla di arte rupestre o archeologia rupestre. Il termine archeologia rupestre, permettetemi, sembra più asettico. No, mi sembra più una disciplina scientifica nel senso archeologico, invece il concetto di arte presume anche dare già una definizione, quindi dire si entra nell'arte e quindi una definizione. Non mi occuperò quindi di quello che è arte e non è arte rupestre, ma mi occuperò di un tema assai annoso tra i colleghi che si occupano di archeologia, ossia il riconoscimento di alcune immagini mediante l'esecuzione di un segno da parte di un incisore. In particolare, una delle prime persone che si è occupato di questo aspetto è il professor Fossati, parlando del maestro di Paspardo, il quale riteneva di poter identificare delle incisioni e in qualche modo attribuire. Utilizzo il termine attribuire perché è tipico della storia dell'arte. Anche gli storici dell'arte spesso dicono il maestro di quell'uomo, il maestro di quell'altro. Ma questo cosa significa? Significa che l'archeologo è in grado di, oltre a raccogliere il dato oggettivo della misura, la collocazione, la tipologia dell'incendio rupestre, è in grado anche di riconoscere, permettetemi, la mano. Allora ci chiediamo, ma è lecito poter riconoscere la mano o meno? Io penso, da storico dell'arte, che si possa fare. Lo fanno anche gli storici dell'arte, riconoscere una mano anziché l'altra. Naturalmente questo riconoscimento non è troppo oggettivo, ma al contrario presume delle qualità da parte dell'archeologo che sono in parte soggettive, ma in parte anche l'abilità nel leggere e nel riconoscere un segno. Quindi ne consegue l'aspetto che possiamo parlare anche di gusto e di estetica. Nel mio contributo facevo un esempio di alcuni canidi sulla Roccia Grande che sono stati realizzati probabilmente nello stesso periodo, ma da 2 autori diversi, per cui c'era il concetto di gusto, cioè un'opera meglio riuscita o poco riuscita. Ma questo avviene non solo nella lettura dell'archeologo, ma anche del comune visitatore. Anche il semplice bambino che visita un parco riesce a individuare il canide che è stato realizzato, diciamo, bene, con delle caratteristiche essenziali, ma che definiscono, per esempio, anche il movimento. Al contrario, ci sono alcuni animali che sono piuttosto tozzi, sgraziati e sicuramente non belli. Se notate, quando entriamo in questo ambito, stiamo entrando nell'ambito del concetto di un giudizio estetico che noi stiamo facendo, ma la domanda a cui non so proprio dare risposta è: ma anche durante la preistoria e la protostoria vi era questo sguardo, ovvero, cioè, i fruitori dell'arte rupestre definivano un'immagine più o meno bella o più o meno ben riuscita. Io credo, se noi, questo è tipico dell'uomo a tutte le latitudini, cioè definire qualcosa di più o meno ben riuscito. Allora io credo che anche tra i cosiddetti, chiamiamoli artisti, incisori comuni, vi fossero quelli che noi diremmo oggi più o meno dotati di una certa abilità incisoria. Ma attenzione, non era solamente una capacità tecnica incisoria, ma era anche un'abilità propriamente artistica di individuare gli elementi salienti di un'immagine per poi, ecco, riprodurla. E poi un altro aspetto di cui mi sono occupato è la questione, per esempio, del ritorno di alcuni soggetti nell'ambito dell'arte rupestre. Una questione annosa, per esempio quella degli oranti, di cui non entro nel merito, però se noi ragioniamo e ci rivolgiamo all'arte rupestre con un concetto estetico, come lo facciamo per le altre discipline artistiche, dovremmo ammettere che a distanza di secoli ci possa essere l'occasione, la possibilità che alcune immagini ritornano. Se noi pensiamo nei 2500 anni di storia dell'arte, propriamente detta, quella che si studia a scuola, abbiamo delle tipologie delle figure umane, abbiamo delle tipologie architettoniche, abbiamo degli elementi che ritornano a secoli diversi, anche declinati in modo diverso. Quindi mi chiedo, è lecito poter pensare che alcune immagini, sto pensando all'orante, possano ritornare anche in epoche diverse, in fasi diverse, magari declinate anche con un livello qualitativo ed estetico diverso. E poi l'ultimo aspetto che io propongo, che questo è un dubbio che rivolgo ai colleghi di archeologia, è: ma questi incisori avevano la possibilità di cimentarsi e provare? L'elemento, l'atto di incidere è una cosa abbastanza complessa, è difficile incidere una roccia e rendere alcune immagini. Non era buona la prima. C'è qualcuno che ha dovuto avere un percorso, permettetemi, formativo. Sto trasferendo l'aspetto in ambito storico-artistico. Oggi gli scultori non fanno la prima scultura della loro vita, ma hanno un processo creativo, formativo. È lecito ipotizzare anche per l'incisore preistorico, protostorico, un percorso di approfondimento, di praticantato, ma permettetemi anche di prova. E vi chiedo, ma dove provavano? Cioè non sono mai state individuate delle superfici in cui si dice queste erano delle prove. Possiamo dire queste sono delle cose malvenute, non so, delle incisioni pessime, ma non sono prove. Allora l'ipotesi è: avevano dei supporti altri, cioè il legno, del materiale, non so, delle piccole pietre su cui incidere. Allora, se noi ammettiamo che l'arte rupestre, oltre a tutte le implicazioni archeologiche, sia un fenomeno tecnico e artistico, dovremmo in questo caso anche ipotizzare che nell'ambito del fenomeno tecnico-artistico vi siano gli elementi di creatività, abilità tecnica, formazione e una sorta di praticantato come in tutte le arti. Io ho concluso, questa era un'introduzione a quello che era la sessione di oggi, e poi i relatori che mi seguiranno andranno poi nello specifico. Lascio la parola a Federico Mainland che coordina e continua la sessione. Grazie Federico.
Grazie Federico. Prima di iniziare con gli altri relatori, volevo un commento, hai dato un bello spunto che apre tutto sommato anche la domanda a: ma c'erano in arte preistorica degli atelier di artisti? E la seconda domanda è: c'erano degli specialisti itineranti che venivano chiamati dalle varie tribù, dagli sciamani, o erano gli sciamani stessi, o comunque questi personaggi, quelli bravi, quelli esperti, venivano chiamati per poter andare a riprodurre, perché la riproduzione delle stesse immagini, degli stessi simboli, poiché risponde a simbologia, vogliamo ammettere che potesse essere un patrimonio di tutti, di chi diciamo, scriveva e di chi leggeva. La capacità di fare forse non era di tutti. E almeno nella mia esperienza la mano si distingue, anche a chilometri di distanza, la stessa mano che ha generato, che ha prodotto un'incisione rupestre sicuramente è riconoscibile in altre immagini, in altre figure. Tutto qui. Comunque grazie. Now we continue with the next speaker. I call James Dodd, who will speak, who will present the rock art and language in a nutshell. Please, James. James, you are mute.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Yeah, I thought it said 1540 on the program. So, but that's fine. I'll just share my screen. Okay, please say something. Yeah, you can see the start screen. Okay, great. This afternoon, I've decided to talk to you a little bit about the relationship between rock art and language. The full details are in the paper, which is submitted to the conference proceedings. So in this little presentation, I'll just focus on a few selected elements. First of all, I'd like to begin by thinking about the characteristics of rock art. It is visual inherently. It can be figurative, it can be abstract. And we can, as scholars or interested members of the public, always discuss what its purpose was. Some people argue that there is a kind of sequence, possibly not akin to the concept of language, whilst others argue that it may be completely random and that there is no governing principles behind the arrangement of the images. It is also, of course, in an environmental and anthropogenic context. So that is to say, how it relates to things like the sea, the mountains, settlements, graves. So then, what are the characteristics of language? It is a linear phenomenon. It has elements which are separated by pauses, a syntax, which refers to the rules of combination and order, which leads to this idea of a sort of sequence in the images. Is it linked to communication? Perhaps, perhaps not. At least in the conventional sense, when we think about speech and writing, what we call so-called natural languages, then that is indeed the case. We think of a sender and a receiver communicating using speech and writing. However, one can also see language as in a much more abstract way. And in fact, any kind of information source can form the basis of a communication system. Whilst this is not so familiar in the humanities, this is well established in fields such as computer science and physics and molecular biology. We can also think in the third bullet point on screen at the moment of the idea of a division between, as I said, natural and artificial languages. So when we think of the scientific applications in physics and biology, they are artificial, created for a purpose, perhaps for documentary reasons. And then we have the so-called natural languages, speech, writing, but also gesture, and body language, and things such as this. So the question is, where does rock art sit in this? And in this little presentation, I hope to at least give a little small hint about my opinion on the subject. Language can be defined in a much more abstract sense. And in my work, I currently take my point of departure in the work of a mathematician, cryptographer, and founder of the field of information theory, Claude Shannon, whose photo is on screen there. In a very influential paper in 1945, he wrote that language is a stochastic process which generates a sequence of symbols according to some system of probabilities. And therefore, any stochastic process which produces a discrete sequence of symbols will be said to be a language. Quite a difficult and complex sentence, perhaps, to understand, especially for our Italian colleagues. But in essence, is this idea of a sequence. And then you have a sequence, and there are some rules governing the selection of the elements in that sequence. Together with the idea of a sequence was the general conclusion that language can be simply seen as information. However, information does not have to be equivalent to semantic meaning. And then this brings us to the next point, which is that there is a distinction between data models used to study rock art and a theoretical model used to study rock art. To put it another way, we can use methods to study rock art without the phenomenon of rock art having to necessarily be language. If, on the other hand, you adopt the theoretical position, so that is to say, you perhaps see rock art as a form of primitive writing or a precursor to writing, or in some way or another related to natural language, this locks you into some quite problematic assumptions. So if we take a data model and just try and think of rock art in that context, we can see that rock art has perhaps a sender. We could perhaps see the images as a message, and we could see the audience as receivers. This sender message receiver model, as it's so called, was first coined in the 1945 work by Claude Shannon. And you can see his original iteration in the context of electronics on the top of the screen. This was developed somewhat more by the eminent linguist Roman Jakobson in the United States of America during the Second World War. And he eventually, through interactions with colleagues we won't go into here, came up with this linguistic variant where a message also has a context, something we're familiar with from rock art, a channel, okay, it could be rock, it could be metal, and it has a code. So that is some series, some sequence, or some symbols to stand for something else. Jakobsson's model was taken forward by a Swedish archaeologist called Jarl Nordblad in the early 1970s. And he proposed tentatively in 1978 the model you see on screen now. This was a structuralist inspired take on the topic of rock art and language. But in it, we can still see the same sender message receiver structure. So on the left, we have a person, we have the images, and then we have the audience on the right. But within this model, as is well established in linguistic theory, you see that the images have relations between themselves, yes, but also between the interlocutors, so that is the sender and the receiver, but also between the images and some kind of underlying significance. So this makes us think of, let's try and think of this in practice now. Before scripts and writing were widespread, people had to communicate, of course, by other means. And on the screen now, you can see a small selection of some of the ways that people have communicated, gathered from around the world. We have things like totem poles. We have things like Andean Kipu, which you can see here. We have things such as what's called the so-called winter counts. That's this thing here on a hide, which was a mnemonic, so that somebody appointed in the North American Plains Indian community could remember the events of a given year. Of course, we also have rock art, which we can see in various appearing in various contexts. And in the paper, which you will can view at your own leisure, you will see where I explore the case study of Plains Indian rock art and its relationship to their graphic communication systems. So that is the codes, the visual codes used in different contexts within that society. And what's interesting about particularly the North American examples from the plains is that written records from the historical period, so-called robe and ledger art, such as we see in this image here, they effectively provide a transcription of what these images and symbols mean. And in this table on the right, James Kaiser and his colleague Klassen have collated some of these meanings together. And so what happens is you have various scenes such as we see all around on the screen here. And these effectively tell a story related to deeds, historic events, or sacred events connected to the sacred realm. In this case here, upper right, you have the vision quest. So people would go and into the wilderness, and they would, should we say, achieve enlightenment. They would receive a vision whilst they were in isolation or in a group with others, and this would become their, so to say, their symbol for the rest of their lives. So this brings us to the idea, in very broad and general terms, so the concept of what is known as orality, the quality of being verbally communicated. And in this little quote here from André Leroy-Gourhan, we can see how essentially in the past, the spoken word was very important, and any means of, or any history had to be transferred using the spoken word. And to extend memory beyond a human lifetime, you have to have various so-called technologies for that society to survive and continue. And that is essentially what Leroy-Gourhan is talking about here, saying it that for the production and survival of the community. And this is Leroy-Gourhan's ideas have been taken forward in many subsequent studies, such as by Karl Couch. And here he says even more explicitly that societies have to have what are called information technologies. And that is to say, they have to have various means to preserve knowledge from one generation to the other. And the ability of societies can be different. So that is why he says the amount of information preserved by a society reflects the information technologies of the society. So then we have this idea of orality. We have this idea that images have been used in the past. How can we perhaps go a little bit further and to try and create some, at least, order, not necessarily to impose order, that would be very colonialist, but to try and understand in a, shall we say, non-Western, in a pre-literate society, in a non-literate society, how knowledge transfer takes place. And so within literature, people are starting to talk over the last few years about graphic communication systems and trying to move away from talking about what is writing and not writing and talking about glottographic and seismographic sign systems. So that is to say, glottographic is to do with speech. You are understanding me talking now, you understand the sounds, and because you have learned English, you know what those sounds mean. Seismographic means that it is based on the visual, the image. And so you have to memorize these visual clues. And of course, that is quite different when we think of how things have operated in the past compared to the present, where, at least in, shall we say, Europe, we are very used to the alphabetical concept of the alphabet and memorizing letters and sounds. So in this connection, as part of my research, I came across the typology of a group of scholars, Morin, Kelly, and Winters, and they make divisions between four main types: emblems, and these can consist of, one can think of totems, standalone symbols, specialized notations. In the case of these, we can think of mathematical notations. So that is to say, you don't need to have knowledge of the system to know, knowledge of the language to be able to use them. Speech-bound notations. So that is what we've been seeing in the ethnographic examples, where we have them acting as images acting as mnemonic. And lastly, writing.
Yes, we have 3 more minutes for you.
That's quite fine. I am on my penultimate slide. And the main division they draw here is between language dependent and language independent. Do you need to know the language or not to use the graphic code? The different codes have different capacities for carrying information. So some can carry a lot, whilst others can carry only a little. So in conclusion, there is a distinction between using data models in the study of rock art and language and their use in a theoretical context. I furthermore argue that Shannon's data model of communication can be used as a basis to study rock art. Information is not necessarily equivalent to meaning, and rock art can be defined and studied as a graphic code. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Interesting presentation. Now the paper is open for discussion. There is a question for James. I have a comment and a question for you. When I read a book or a letter or simply an article on a newspaper, I can put notes. I can underline something. I can highlight a part of a statement which is interesting, or can delete some part which with which I do not agree. Now, can we read the rock art in this way? I mean, when we find figures which are superimposed to other figures, or which are added with a different patina to a scene that was already on the rocks. We can read. We normally do that by interpreting and reading the rock art. Do you mean that with your model, we can give the same interpretation of rock art, like notes and highlighting and deleting and underlining, as we do normally while reading a text?
So if I understand your question, so it is you say, can we annotate and query rock art in the same way as we would a text? Is that I understand correct?
Yeah, correct.
Well, of course, we are in the present. We cannot effectively have a dialogue as you would with a text in the present day. So we cannot underline as you say. So our role is passive. Can others do it? That is a very interesting question. When we think about, the answer is perhaps yes. When we think about how figures have been updated, and yes, and also superimpositions, we know that things have been modified. Figures have been modified, and particularly in Scandinavia, it's well attested. And why did people do that? And we also know some figures are very deep, so people have come back. So annotation and querying could be one explanation, but of course there can be many others, but we won't go into those here, of course. Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
There are other questions? No. So I call Maria Susana Barrao and Daniel Seward Castillo Benitez. They present the rock art paintings of El Ídolo from an aesthetic and semiotic perspective. Please, Maria. There is no voice.
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Thank you.
Buenas. En esta oportunidad es grato poder disertar sobre una mirada de la estética y la semiótica a las pinturas rupestres del Ídolo. Creo que tengo que colocar aquí. A ver, ¿se ve bien? Ahí está, ¿no? Bien, empezamos entonces. A ver,
Vediamo tutto, vediamo a schermo intero.
Podemos ver bien la diapositiva,
Maria, you're mute.
pero no entendimos. Daniel.
There's no audio. Put the audio.
¿me escuchan?
Sí, 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 sí.
Okay, we hear you. Sentiamo.
Deve cominciare da capo. Deve cominciare da capo. O non sa. Habla. Prova a hablar. No, no. Ma questa è iniziata la presentazione o no?
Vicente Neve.
Daniel, ¿qué tal?
¿Qué tal?
Sí, Daniel, ¿puede hablar?
Claro, claro que sí. Lo tengo grabado mejor. Ya, ahí está.
Puedes empezar tu presentación. Daniel, abbiamo il video da mandare al posto. Daniel, si tu conexión a internet no está buena, podemos enviar el video registrado de tu presentación. ¿Qué tal, Daniel? ¿No? Puede ser que su
Está bien,
conexión...
está bien. Parece que no está buena la conexión en este momento. Estamos en el día aquí, hay...
Mira, esperamos un minuto y si no puedes comenzar la presentación, vamos a enviar tu video. ¿Bien? Un minuto porque no lo olvido. Forse è pronto il video? Dov'è che... Daniel, vamos con el video registrado. Okay, we start with the recorded video because the connection is not good. Okay, Federico.
Es grato saludarles en esta ocasión y poder disertar sobre una mirada desde la estética y la semiótica a las pinturas rupestres de Dulo, Doña Grande, Amazonas. El abrigo rocoso con las pinturas rupestres está ubicado en la cara este de una elevación conformada por ruinas sedimentarias, depositadas en estratos horizontales que presentan una coloración de variedad de grises, lo mismo que nuestro pueblo a partir de meteorización y por la acción del hombre, que excavó y retiró materiales, construyendo un espacio que exhibe características antropomorfas. Esta condición es el punto de partida para evaluar la estética del sitio de arte rupestre, ya que hubo intencionalidad en el proceso, quizás en la búsqueda de generar una atracción emocional, interés, excitación o expectativa. Sin lugar a dudas, se buscó y transmitió un mensaje sutil, casi inconsciente. El abrigo rocoso destaca por una coloración rojiza, mide 2,20 metros de largo y 1,50 metros de ancho y 1,10 de alto. Las características distintivas son el techo y la plataforma inferior o balcón que permite el desplazamiento de los adultos. Las pinturas rupestres se plasmaron en un espacio que fue elegido y preparado para cada fin. La superficie de la roca se intervino alisándola y dándole un acabado notorio. El sistema iconográfico que integra el ídolo se diseñó y ubicó para ser visto y preservado, pintándolo en un área protegida por el techo del alero. Las características principales son la alta visibilidad, excelente acústica, fácil acceso y un contexto paisajístico de espacio abierto, de espacio pendiente que permitirá la reunión de un grupo social amplio que excediría la unidad familiar para involucrar a la comunidad local, un grupo de descendencia o linaje, con la parcialidad de Hanan y Uri, o derecha e izquierda, arriba o abajo, bien definida de acuerdo al sistema de creencias andino, que concibe el concepto de ideologías de dualidad como un eje básico de referencia. El alero a la plataforma inferior o balcón del abrigo se realiza a través de una abertura en la base de la formación rocosa y luego escalando una sucesión de bloques de piedra. El único color empleado en la ejecución de los motivos y también registramos el resultado de las figuras que apreciamos correspondió a un proceso de recreación de las mismas o actualización al momento del rito. El diseño central es un motivo antropomorfo conocido como el idul, que mide 43 centímetros de altura por 52 de ancho. La figura lleva una máscara ligeramente cuadrangular con un tocado de 3 puntas sobre el lado derecho. El cuello es cuadrangular y el cuerpo circular y decorado. Los antebrazos están levantados en señal de invocación y las manos están abiertas, exhibiendo espacios casi cuadrangulares en las palmas y los 10 dedos. En cuanto a las piernas, las rodillas y los tobillos no fueron representados, y los pies con 5 dedos muestran una posición distorsionada, indicando el trance y el vuelo del chamán. Esta configuración estética desproporcionada se correlaciona en varios aspectos con la pintura de los chamanes del sitio del Higuerón en el Valle Chicama, uno de los sitios que se investigaron con anterioridad. El sitio con pinturas rupestres del Higuerón, a la cual hemos denominado Zona 1, se encuentra localizado en un espacio abierto, como el caso de Guidulo. Los chamanes pintados en el sitio del Higuerón muestran una estética desproporcionada, tal como lo mencionamos para el caso del ídolo. Emplear la técnica negativa en el pintado de la máscara y la parte del cuerpo del chamán, la roca natural se integró en el diseño del motivo. Se trata de un recurso técnico que pone en evidencia la vigencia de un sistema de creencias que la información histórica respalda y explica. La misma alude a la petrificación de héroes, ancestros reales o míticos y de divinidades que se adentraban o convertían en roca, preservando el jamaquén o aliento vital que le permitía emitir oraciones y de tal forma constituían objetos de adoración, una manifestación de sacralización y perpetuación. El contraste entre los espacios, entre positivo y negativo, es relevante al incorporar en la ecuación al pensamiento de Smith el desplazamiento y el corte superior de la imagen de las dos serpientes unidas representaría una metodimia, aludiendo a la instancia sagrada, manantial o cueva de origen. También la pintura en positivo de la boca de un felino con largos colmillos constituye tanto el punto de partida esencial para la cosmovisión del motivo central, como la representación del felino protector en la concepción de Smith. Esta perspectiva se refiere a una mitología de origen natalina y está directamente relacionada con míticos. Los dedos y los espacios cuadrangulares representados en cada mano del ídolo están expresando el concepto de dualidad, aludiendo a la segunda persona del chamán, ayudante, otra mitad. Esta evidencia, sumada lo mencionado sobre la participación de un grupo de descendencia en el sitio, con las parcialidades Hanan y Uri representadas, indica la representación de una diarquía masculina, compuesta por 2 chamanes que la lideraban, cuya representación en el sitio construyó una estética innovadora. A ambos se les percibía en el trance de transformación y vuelo chamánico, convergiendo en el tránsito del umbral de la paterina, que solo los pájaros podían atravesar según el postulado de Smith, en una innovación dirigida a los ancestros reales o míticos. La innovación estética se amplió en todo el sistema plasmado en los espacios Urín y Hanan, integrando a la vestimenta y objetos de poder de los chamanes. El cuerpo del individuo es circular, definido por una línea gruesa de pintura seguida por una secuencia de serpientes fusiformes. La decoración interna muestra un objeto de poder ubicado bajo el cuello y diseños no figurativos dispuestos en forma asimétrica, separados por un motivo vertical en el sector inferior, sistema que correspondería con la vestimenta de los chamanes, como lo registramos en los sitios del Higuero 1 y el chamán en trance de vuelo en el sitio de las guitarras. El sitio de grabados rupestres, las guitarras, Poro, Cajamarca, diarquía masculina grabada en el sector superior del chamán y por debajo el líder comunitario portando las varas. El chamán lo podemos ver en mayor detalle. Quisiera contar también en cuanto a un disco duro, a un disco de oro, agujeros para realizar las vestimentas, en el sitio Chongoyape, en la costa norte, y pertenece a la expedición, la cual es sumamente interesante. La vestimenta y objetos de poder del chamán Urí se plasmaron en dicho sector. A la izquierda del espacio plástico, constituido como una extensión de la decoración correspondiente al cuerpo de la imagen, construyendo otra resolución de estética singular, que en esta parte recuerda al estudio de Kaufman sobre el sector superior de la estela Raimondi, cuando sostiene que corresponde a la parte de atrás del manto de la deidad. En el contexto de un juego de imágenes superformes, interpretando los signos guía que diseñaron a partir de una figura cuadrangular, centra a la que se formaron 4 segmentos paralelos a los lados, dejando libres los ángulos que se convierten en los espacios que conectan con los extremos de la figura. Las cabezas de 4 manos. La vestimenta y objetos de poder de un chamán se pintaron sobre la derecha, predominando los motivos sempartiformes, especialmente el signo guía que ya describimos. La imagen de la lengua bífida de Arambar se tomó, representó adherida en formas semicirculares, figurativas y no figurativas, un patrón que esconde la figura del único mal representado de perfil, con el cuerpo entero escalonado, así como la cabeza de un tocado compuesto de 4 extremos con extensiones uniformes, que siguiendo a Smith podría representar nimia de la pacarita de origen. Por otra parte, arriba y la perpendicular del espacio plástico dibujaron un rectángulo pintado con otro inscrito abierto en 3 sectores para permitir el diseño de las cabezas de 3 amados en perfil, dirigidas hacia el centro de la figura, siguiendo la secuencia izquierda-derecha, y separadas por 3 círculos concéntricos sobre el lado derecho. Al tratar de analizar este signo, tomamos en cuenta la metonimia establecida por Howard Gamer entre serpientes a mano, los recursos hídricos y los ancestros míticos, así como la propuesta de Smith sobre los macarinos o juguetes de origen, por debajo del juego de figuras separatiformes se pintaron encastradas, inscritas en una forma cuadrangular e incompleta. Un signo guía mucho más estilizado se grabó en el sitio cercano de Zapatalgo. En lo que respecta a los objetos de oro pertenecientes a una colección particular, proceden la vista del Valle de Moncha. En el espacio central de esta pieza se ubicaron los ancestros reales y míticos. Esta pieza guarda una correlación formal y de estilo con otra similar recuperada en el sitio arqueológico Punturuasi, perteneciente a Cajamarca. El aproximarnos al código que enlace el sistema representado implica centrar la atención en los signos guías descritos para el idulio, que muestran un diseño estructurado. También exhiben algunos objetos de poder confeccionados en oro, con agujeros para cogerlos en la vestimenta, procedentes de la costa norte y pertenecientes a la tradición cultural de Piznique, periodo formativo final, 800 años antes de Cristo. Estos objetos comparten una estructura circular o cruciforme con un espacio central de diseño cuadrangular, circular, romboidal, o con o sin imágenes inscritas, que siguiendo a Smith referirían a la pacarina, lugar de origen, fertilidad, asociado a los manantiales de montañas representando por las figuras imperformes. En cuanto al diseño del espacio sagrado, en el segundo signo guía del espacio Hana, pintaron la boca de una madre de perfil. Y siguiendo a Horkheimer, revelaría la inmortalidad de los ancestros míticos. Una representación que es muy consistente con el pensamiento de Smith. Aquí tenemos algún ejemplar tomado del libro Oro en el Antiguo Perú, compilado por Lavalle. Y de igual manera también este otro ejemplar. También tenemos esta otra muestra. Este objeto tendremos un análisis pormenorizado. En el espacio central del disco se observa un chamán. Durante el complejo de transformación y vuelo chamánico, sosteniendo un objeto bicónico que exhibe en el extremo la representación del Padre San Pedro, un conocido alucinógeno, ampliamente difundido. Además, en la otra mano, tocado, vestimenta, lleva motivos separatiformes. El perímetro del área nodal de esta está conformado por 4 segmentos semicirculares que unen los diseños de frente de 4 amaros dispuestos en diámetros opuestos, diseñados de tal forma que si se rotan las imágenes se observa que las figuras mantienen su identidad. 4 segmentos semicirculares externos y con extremos curvos que unen los ojos de los amaros, es decir, las pacarinas de origen. En los espacios intermedios agregaron motivos perpendiculares, a los que adosaron 2 motivos separatiformes en forma de bastón o báculo, con extremos convergentes y cerrados sobre sí, conformando el área triangular que lleva la cabeza esquematizada de un oficio. Por otra parte, en solo 2 de los segmentos perpendiculares, ubicados en los extremos de un mismo diámetro, adicionaron en el extremo de los diseños de las cabezas en perfil de amaros dirigidas hacia el centro de la figura, dividiendo a la composición en mitades. Tenemos un chamán pintado en trance de vuelo, sosteniendo un objeto bicónico similar al anterior, plasmando en el sector 6 del sitio Monte Calvario de Undima en Cajamarca. Aquí un objeto cerámico de la colección Mac Díaz Díaz, el mismo que se empleó para contener sustancias alucinógenas que eran consumidas aplicando tubos de caña, hueso o materiales similares en ambos extremos, permitiendo que el chamán soplara la misma directamente en la nariz de los participantes del ritual o ceremonia. Aquí es la vista general del sitio de pintura rupestre Monte Calvario. El chamán en trance de vuelo se colocó justo por debajo de la pared mítica. En el mismo sitio junto con el antropomorfo masculino que integra la pareja mítica, se pintaron una mano y un ojo. La primera representando la aprehensión efectiva del territorio y el segundo a la patarina o lugar de origen. Finalmente, un ojo grande se plasmó en el mismo sector de Monte Calvario y también sostenemos que representa a la pacarina o lugar de origen. Desde ya quedo sumamente agradecido por la atención prestada. Gracias.
Gracias, Daniel. Can I put a question? Could you understand? ¿Entiende unas preguntas en inglés?
Yes, I understand. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I did not understand the chronology of this,
Yes.
of this painter. Which
The
is
chronology is 800 before Christ.
Yeah. Okay.
For all of them, all are three sites in there. One is the one we are presenting, El Idulo. The other one is El Higuerón, and the other one is Poro Poro paintings. And they all have similar chronology. And it correlates with the invasion of the what is called the mountainous area in northern Peru. The catastrophic event took place around same date, and populations were obliged to leave the coast.
Understand. And another question. I imagine that there are no more natives still capable to understand the messages, to understand the meaning of these pictures.
No, not at this point, no. Some signs were taken. The snake was taken, but the code is lost. We are cracking the code with historical information and archaeological information. We are adding two well-known ethnographers, Smith and Hockenheim, to complete the information given by the rock art paintings and also by the golden objects of power found in sites that are almost nearby in the northern coast with the same dating, 800 before Christ.
Before Christ.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was very nice to find it in such a way so that you could explain how there were two shamans. And also the clothes were shown on the right and the left side.
Thank you. There are other questions? No. Now it should be the time for the debate. If there are questions or comments on the three presentations that we had from Federico Troletti, from James Dodd, and from Maria and Danielle. I understand that there is no question. We are early, and instead of doing a break now, I may propose to call the next speaker, which is myself, who is myself, and do my presentation now. Then we will make a break after my presentation, if you agree. Just a moment, I share my screen. Could you see my screen?
Lo vediamo.
Bene, grazie. The image of the Ibex through 4,000 years from the Near East to Central Asia, origin and evolution of a myth. Let's say that the day before yesterday, Uzi Avner made an excellent presentation of Ibex image in the rock art and more or less in the same geographic area. Therefore, I will thank him and I will skip a part of my presentation, not to repeat some things, but the concepts are different. We can say that there is a lot of evidence that Ibex image is associated with magic and religion, and there is a more and more consistent hypothesis that this figure is the symbol of the lunar deity. It's called Sin or Nan or Star. It depends on the geographic area and on the people worshipping this moon god. And that cult belongs to an area expanded from Mesopotamia, where it is attested since 4000 before Christ in the Susa, Mari, towards the four cardinal points, and lasted at least until the beginning of the Christian era. The sacred value of Ibex hunting has also been extensively discussed with reference to fertility rites and propitiation of rain, as it has been explained and underlined by Uzi Avner. The association of Ibex and crescent in cult objects and the rock art scenes strengthens the hypothesis that the Ibex image in the prehistoric and proto-historic art was related to the pre-Islamic worshipping of the lunar god in Near East and Central Asia. Dating hypothesis. Even the most sophisticated modern methods leave room for doubt in the interpretation of the age of the rock art. According to the Anatis classification, Ibex images at Art.com start in the Chalcolithic period, with few exceptions from Neolithic, and continue along the early Bronze period. During about 1,000, let's say 2,000 years of rock art, Ibex images have been engraved in the Negev, along or in scenes representing hunting, dance, childbirth, and in association with celestial elements as well. In later periods of rock art, the images of Ibex are found in different contexts and seem having lost their original holy value. On the contrary, the objects coming from excavations have dating proved by different methods, which are the methods of archaeology. Thus, dating is more certain. This is the area considered in my speech, and the sites that I have considered, including both rock art and many objects from the excavations, and is going from the west coast of Anatolia, Caria, and Akkad in Egypt to the Tibet Highland in east, and from north to south from Armenia, Mount Uttazar, until Saudi Arabia with Saba and Hadramaut. Uzi already presented the Nakada jars. What is interesting to underline here is the large figures of ships, of boats with the Ibex figurehead. There are many of such findings in the museums. These one are coming from the Pushkin Museum in Moscow. But this element is also found in rock art. This is the rock of Narli in the Mediterranean coast of Turkey, in Caria. There are many elements relating to water, to the sea. The snake shapes, of course, the fishes, the boats. There are 3 boats represented here. There are footprints. And what is interesting to underline here is that also in this engraving, we have a boat with a figurehead, with an Ibex shape. Ibex shapes, Ibex figurehead are also found in the neologic ship models. There are many. A couple is presented here. They are coming, they are dating back to the 13th, 11th century BC. And also the association with Ibex and comb has been already reported by Uzi yesterday, with reference to the interpretation of rain associated with the Ibex image. This gives the opportunity to me to present these 2 small vessels with these images of Ibex associated with the comb, with the snake, with the disc with the dot in the center, which in my interpretation is a symbol of the moon. More or less the same symbol is in the right part of the slide. The difference, there is only one difference, that we don't have a comb here, but the rain is represented, symbolized by these parallel lines. Both animals have a sex, a male sex, which is not common. It's not common in the, for example, in the rock art of the Negev, but is found in Central Asia. This is the back of the left vessel. It's a small jar, and you see here that we have a live tree between the 2 animals, also associated again with the water, with the rain, and with the moon disk. The same elements are found in the rock art. This is Mount Uttazar. We have the association, well, let's say that there is different period on this rock. There is a number of Ibex images which are older, and with the lighter patina, we have the association of a snake shape, of a comb, and other Ibex images, hunter, dog. The only element, well, apart from the palette, the only element which is different from those we saw is this figure, probably a jack, which is hunted by this hunter with the dog. Here we are in Afghanistan, the Wakhan corridor, and we have a new element here, which is important in my opinion, which is the swastika symbol. For many years, many authors considered or interpreted the swastika like a sun symbol. At least in this context and in some context of Negev and Valcamonica, swastika here does not represent the sun. This is a symbol of full moon. You see here the central figure of an ibex. We can consider the crescent, which are the horns of the ibex, the full moon, which is the swastika, the waning moon, which is under the ventral line of the animal, and the segment means no moon, which means new moon in my opinion, in my interpretation of this rock art from Afghanistan. This is from Iranian Kurdistan, the association between ibex image hunted by a dog. This is considered a hunting scene without hunter, and associated with crescent with dot in the middle, in the center. Again, we have an association between ibex and the swastika-like symbol. This is not a full swastika. This is the symbol we find sometimes in Valcamonica, for example, associated with ibex. And this is an interesting scene because we have a woman giving birth here and worshipping the ibex. We have probably the man, which is also worshipping and touching the horns of the ibex with an instrument, with a spear or something like that, and probably to get power, the power of the god, and to improve the birth, the fertility, and the luck and the prosperity of the newborn. Again, the association between swastika and crescent is seen here. This is pre-Buddhist rock engraving from Tibet, from Upper Tibet. You see that we have the sun on one side and the moon, in my interpretation, on the other side, with the crescent and the full moon. Some authors interpret that like a star, or maybe Venus or something like that. I don't know. I don't understand why. This is most probably crescent and full moon, like we have in other representation in the Near East, where a disk is associated to the crescent. This image has the same symbols and is also coming from Upper Tibet. Now, this engraving is interesting in the fact that it seems to represent a two-headed ibex. Well, don't consider the vertical line, which is a later addition, often found in the rock art of Valcamonica, but I'm considering now just the quadruped and the two pair of horns. In the past, or at the beginning, that figure, that imaging, was considered like this one, which is very common in the rock art of the Bronze Age in the Negev. An animal, an ibex, which has exaggerated long horns, which arrive to the tail of the animal. But consider that the horns are not a full line. They are separated here, and most probably they represent, in fact, a two-headed animal. In the same period, we have a clear representation of this, which should have been a myth that we cannot understand now, but was probably well understood during the Chalcolithic age, which is coming from the copper hoard of Nahal Mishmar, a mace head or a standard with a two-headed Ibex image. But the same kind of symbol is found in Luristan. We are in the first millennium BC, here, the beginning of the first millennium, with this standard, which is a two-headed image of Ibex. And same here, in this pendant is also coming from Luristan. And here we have a belt buckle, bronze belt buckle, belt buckles, sorry, with two-headed ibexes represented. And finally, I would like to show you this agate seal, where the same symbol is represented, finely carved in the agate, with an animal with two heads, very carefully carved, with the movement opposite to the contradiction of this figure, of course, because the two halves of the animals are moving, are running in opposite directions, but which tells us that about 4,000 years after the horde of Nahal Mishmar, we have still this element remaining in the art, in this case of story. Winged ibex. Representation of the winged animal refers for sure to its divine origin and confirms the religious value linked to these images in proto-historic art. The left side, you see the animal, it's part of the vexel, and silver and gold, the wings are gold. The other part of the animal is silver. It's Achaemenian, 4th century BC, is in the Altes Museum in Berlin. And on the right side, we have a cheek plate, a horse bit, Luristan, 6th century before Christ. This is exposed in the Cleveland Museum of Art. Winged ibex is also represented in a bronze vessel like this one. This is associated with rosette, and the rosette cannot be interpreted as a moon symbol. It's rather a sun symbol in this case. This is coming from northwestern Iran, 7th century BC. It's exposed in the Metropolitan Museum of New York. Well, being a god of sky, as such, the moon god would be able to fly. And other images of winged ibex are very frequent in Sassanid seals. The one on the bottom left is an extreme synthesis of the winged ibex figure with just muzzle with horns, neck, and the wings bottom. Sphinx. On the left side, we see a basalt slab from Carchemish, Turkey. It's beginning first millennium BC. And on the right side, we have two seals where the same figure, which is an animal with human face, with horns, and associated with the crescent, is represented in two seals. The top one is in the British Museum, and the bottom one is from a private collection and from Janet Nas, 3000 BC. And last but not least, I would like to present you this new Babylonian seal. This is a scaraboid. This is presenting a human figure. This is the god scene with the cornucopia, which means prosperity, associated with the moon crescent, associated with triangles, which are also frequently associated in the rock art of Archercom to the Ibex image. Here, the Ibex is a prancing animal, and altogether we have still the elements which pertain to the image of the moon god. Prancing ibexes are also in the Greek world. The Cesnola crater in Metropolitan Museum has a central figure, two prancing ibexes with a tree of life in the middle. Interestingly, we have the ibex, which is nursing a pup. And the same image, which is considered also painted by the master of Cesnola, is here in the Museum of Pitecouze, the Ischia Isle, where on the bottom part of the Lekythos, we have prancing ibexes associated with something that seems a solar symbol, a sun symbol here, and even better to be understood in the Cesnola crater. Here, the association of the ibex with the moon, crescent and disk is very clear. Association also with the snakes. And we have the same symbols that we already saw on the painted vessels and on the rock art. Probably this is the representation of rain. In any way, we have in an incense burner dedicated to the moon god, the association of ibex with the moon and the water. This is exposed in the Metropolitan Museum. There is another like this one, which is almost identical. It does not have the snakes, which is in the British Museum. But incense burners with the image of ibex are also have been also unearthed in Tel Basmosian in Iraq. They belong to the Hurrian period, and they are made of terracotta, and they are exposed in Iraqi museums. Now the conclusion: the lunar deity in the Mesopotamian Near East area was always represented as an adult male, as either as a human or animal figure. When represented as a human figure, the god is depicted as an adult man with a beard and couple of horns, and the crescent moon within the frame of horns or in front of the man. When is a zoomorphic figure, the lunar god is depicted as a Baal in some areas, or as an Ibex in Mesopotamia, in other areas of Near East and Central Asia. Both the Ibex and the Baal likely conceal the moon god, and moon worship in ancient time was associated with life and fertility. The crescent is very clear. The full moon could be represented as a disk, as a cross, as a swastika, or as a disk with a dot in the center, or just as a dot. All combinations of both symbols are found in the rock art of Near East and Central Asia. The representation of the winged animal is certainly later, becoming evident in the art of Iron Age, but of course it refers to the same religious ideas obviously worked over the millennia that have passed since the beginning of the lunar cult in the late Neolithic. In the art of the origin, the representations are naturalistic, while later on it starts the idea of the god as a creature with supernatural characteristics. The two-headed ibex, the winged ibex, respond to that belief. The representation of anthropomorphic winged creatures respond to the same pattern and to a further evolution, not so much of religious ideas, in the way of representing the personification of divinity as a human being. In the Iron Age, the representation of the god seen also begins as a human being with characters of a person of rank, but no longer with supernatural characteristics such as those described. And this is preceding and introducing the ideas of the Greco-Roman world, which will place the human person at the center of the universe and consequently represent the divinities as human beings with all their positive and negative characteristics. I concluded. Thank you. If there are questions, I will be happy to answer.
Come here near the camera, please.
Thank you very much, Maynard. Very interesting. My question is, if you know any ethnographic legend or written mythological story involving the Ibex?
Excuse me, a written story in?
Do you know any ethnographic story about the Ibex or mythological story?
Well, the only one I know is the one reported by Uzi, published and reported also in the conversation of yesterday, that is reported by people exploring South Arabia in the last century, and having questioned why a tribe in that area was hunting an ibex, and why this ibex was cooked and ate in very small pieces by those people. And the answer of the I can say that the shaman, the answer of the head of the tribe was that they did it because if they did not, it will not rain. It was still a rain-evoking procedure, something that remained in the millennia, a remnant of prehistoric rites.
Thank you very much.
Well, if there are no other questions, perhaps we can do our break now. It is 4:40. I anticipated my speech. Perhaps we can, well, the program is to start at 4:50, but I think we can start again at 5. We can have 20 minutes break. Okay. See you later.
Grazie. Buonasera, qui ci siamo.
Bene. Sono rientrati in sala?
Sì, ci siamo.
Ci siamo. Bene. Well, good afternoon again. We start the second part of the session 8. We have Uzi Avner, who is presenting the speech on life and death in the rock art of Ufda Valley, southern Israel. Please, Uzi.
Thank you. Okay, this is our title, Life and Death in Rock Art in the Negev Desert, Israel. I'll present two cases. Okay. Okay, this is our title, Life and Death in Rock Art in the Negev Desert, Israel. I will present to you cases from two sites in Ufda Valley. I will show you in a minute where it is. But before that, I would like to repeat a kind of warning that I mentioned in my first lecture, that I'm aware that interpretation of rock art is not so much appropriate by some scholars, but since I'm a bad boy, I do try to understand what stands behind the rock art and suggest the interpretation, but strongly recommend that you do not accept my interpretation. Okay, here's the map of the Negev. You see also the ratio between annual average precipitation in blue and annual potential evaporation in yellow. And here, this is in the south is Ufda Valley in the Lat region. Here we have a ratio of 1 to 180 rain against evaporation. The area is very dry, hyper-arid. As you can see in this picture was taken in 79 before construction of an air base that took most of the area of the valley. But you don't see here any tree, any animal, no Bedouin tent or so, a pure desert. However, the picture is a little misleading because sometimes after flood, the valley looks that way. And here on the right side, you see a map of an unfinished survey, archaeological survey of the area east of the valley. The western side is not that much calculated. And on the left side, you see numbers of sites in the upper part, habitations and utilitarian sites. In the lower part, cult sites. The density of sites here is actually the highest in the entire Negev, despite that this is the driest area in the Negev. So the question is, why so many remains of human presence and activity? This is how a typical habitation site looks like. The length is about 36 meters. It consists of a courtyard and clusters of rooms, and inhabited one extended family. Anything between 20 and 80 people or so. lived in a site like this. They had herd and also a lot of farming equipment, like eggs, which were used, which were hafted and used for tilling the ground, hundreds of sickle blades of different types, hundreds of grinding stones for grinding the wheat and barley for flour, quite nice silos. This is one of the nicest excavated in Israel in the period. And also, we have two tools like this made of hard limestone, which are plow tips. These are actually the earliest ever found in the world, dated about 4000 BC. What happened? Okay. We also have botanical finds, like olive pits, 2 types of domesticated wheats, 4 types of domesticated barley, all from the 4th millennium BC. We have also many calcites, as you saw before, and also you can read below, many sites of standing stones, open-air sanctuaries, and others. The standing stones, most of them represent deities and organic groups of deities in repeating numbers. And open-air sanctuaries are also quite interesting. Here you see one site with an open-air sanctuary, dated to the late Neolithic. I will show you later the seafood dates. And on the eastern side, the picture is taken from east to west. On the eastern side, you see below a row of animals in geoglyphs made by small flagstones set into the ground. A close-up to the back part of the sanctuary. This cell is like a Holy of Holies with a group of 17 small standing stones in the middle, representing, in this case, ancestors. And also 3 sunken altars with C14 dates. You can see the dates here. We have 4 dates of the mid-6th millennium BC, but with artifacts, we go down to the beginning of the 2nd millennium BC. You see here pottery sherd of the Middle Bronze period which is considered missing in the desert, but it is not so missing. These are the animals. Here you see an oblique picture, and this is the stone-by-stone drawing. But if you go to the left side, you see that the animals are incomplete, and they are completed by us by small stones, so the spectator can distinguish between original and restoration. What we see here, if you look now on the right side, we see 15 animals facing east and 1 animal facing west. All these animals have raised the tail wherever it is preserved, and it's quite an interesting case. We have a few other sites with stone drawings like this, not many. Here, on the top left, you see an idealistic restoration of 1 animal. The raised tail is quite a good logo of the leopard, as you see here, with the she leopard named Shtom Zion, died already in 95. And here, an example from Chapter Huyuk, 7th millennium BC, leopards on the wall plaster and the painting with raised tail. This is quite typical for leopards. Also, in the animals of Fulda Valley, we have remains of dark stones that symbolize the spots. The question is, what are these animals? Why did they make them? In my opinion, they represent gods or goddesses for some reasons. First of all, in the ancient Near East, it was very common that gods were represented in a human shape, in animal shape, and also in hybrid shape, like human body and the animal head, or the opposite. This is well known. Second, all the leopards are facing east, much like the orientation of the standing stones, matzebot, and open air sanctuaries and other cult sites. The east is the side of the rising sun. It's believed to radiate life, prosperity, fertility, and so forth. Third is that wherever the eye has been preserved in the head of the animal, it takes most of the area of the head. And this is a quite a clear example. Here, the eye is a 32 centimeter in diameter, flint rock, dark, and indicating the eye. So, a large eye we often find in representations of deities, which have eyes that see everything. Oh, sorry. Another point, in different cultures and periods, we see examples of priests wearing leopard skin. On the left side is one out of a large circle of priests, according to the interpretation of Mellard, dancing above, around the big bull, or in another example in Chateaubriand, big ram. So they are dancing in a kind of ritual and wearing the leopard skin. Another example from Egypt, from the Book of the Dead, 2nd millennium BC. You see here, sorry. You see here a Sem priest attending a family in a burial ceremony. Here is the dead inside the coffin, and he is wearing a cheetah skin, which is the same family. The idea is that for the sake of the ceremony, the priest is wearing the skin of the animal in order to endow on himself the mythological power of the animal. But there is another point. Here we see a small animal mounted on the back of a larger one. This is the eye of the small one and the tail, which is incomplete. And also we see the same here. This is the eye of another small one. This is the tail cut by another animal. And he is standing on a missing back of a leopard, that these are his legs. Idealistic restoration shows this, as you see it here. And the direct parallel, although much later, is the statues from Egypt showing a cat and a kitten. But there are many other examples of one on top of the other. In some cases, we know who are they, like in the later cases. This one is Nike, carrying Tiche on her back. And here, oh, sorry. No. And here we see Demeter and Persephone. But all the other examples are actually of female. Oh, what's happening? Not good. Here, for example, we see the snake goddess from the snake goddess from Knossos with a leopard on her head. Actually, in all these cases, it's quite clear that we deal with females. Male in this double position are extremely rare. Females are quite common. And here we can see some examples of the connection between female and the leopards. A famous example from Chateaubriand, a woman, a goddess, sitting on the seat with two leopard heads and giving birth. So it means that the leopard is connected in a way to fertility, to birth giving. Another, little later, example from Hachilar, Turkey, also a woman, goddess, sitting on a leopard and hugging a young leopard. Here we see something similar. A woman sitting on the seat with two dotted heads and nursing a baby with a dotted head. This one is Hellenistic from Marasha in Israel, around 200 BC. But despite the different, okay, good. Despite the difference in time, here almost 7,000 years and almost 6,000 years, we see the same idea, the same expression of an idea. And also, in some stelae from Egypt, we see a goddess named Kudshu, which is a Hebrew word, Hebrew Canaan word, the Holy One, standing on a lion, the same feline family, with the god Min and the god Reshef. One is Egyptian, one is Canaanite. So we see here very few examples. There are many more. The connection between goddesses and feline animals. Gods, on the other hand, commonly stand on wolves. So we see here some distinction. And then, with this understanding, we go back to the general scenery of the animals. We see here on the left side the row of she animals. Now we can identify them as she leopards facing east. They are facing east to the side of the rising sun, as I said, fertility, prosperity, and so forth. They symbolize the fertility because they bring the meat in order to extend the family. But what about this animal? This one, which is this? This is an oryx with straight horns, and he is a prey. He is a herbivore. He is a prey. He is looking to the west, which is the side universally, the side of the world of the dead. And also, he is headless. So he symbolizes death. What we see here, to make it short, is kind of a scenery which was enacted during the ceremony by building these animals and dealing with a cycle of life and death, life and death. From here, we move to the western side of the valley, more or less where the picture is taken from. And first of all, one short preface to the next one. Here we see examples from the Negev rock art, which are very typical. Quite simple, not highly artistic, but in my opinion, full of content, full of interest. On the background of the simplicity of these examples, this one is unique. I don't know anyone like this, not in the Negev, not in Sinai, not in southern Jordan. This is the only one. There are a few which are also a little complex, but nothing compete with this one in the aesthetic side, in the artistic presentation, in the complex shape, and so forth. And the question is, what do we see here? Have any idea? My attempt to, let's say, decipher it begins with dividing it into a few elements. There are several different ways to do it, but I will show you only one, which is best supported by additional materials. But I remind you not to accept my interpretation. This is the way I suggest to see it. 4 elements, each one with different color. I hope it seems okay. And how do we begin? In my opinion, with a lower element, which is an animal with a tail and an open mouth. Open mouth means actually a predator, like a wolf from Hong and like a lion from Sinai. So we have a predator. And also we have some dots here. It means leopard. The leopards are well connected to the prehistory of the valley, as we saw before in the open-air sanctuary. By the way, I did not mention it, but according to a few artifacts collected below this engraving and a few other indications, this should be dated anywhere between the 6th and 4th millennium BC. And there was another connection to leopards in the valley. All the empty small triangles that you see here are size of any kind, but the red ones are leopard traps, either small or large ones. This is how it looks like. And in two cases, we dated the traps like this with the OSL. I'm sure that you know the message. The meaning of this number that you see here, this date, is that the trap, this trap, went out of use no later than the second half of the 4th millennium BC. So it means that it's actually earlier. If we had enough budget to date more traps, I believe that we would go down back close to the beginning of herding in the desert, which is around 6000 BC. So we have here good connection with the leopards. Now, if this is the leopard, we are supposed to find here female women, goddesses or so. And actually, I suggest to see here two. One with the head up, one with the head down. This means life and death. Similarly, 2 minutes? 2? 3. Okay, I'll do it fast. Some examples that we know of double women, and also Akkadian seals showing Ishtar, Inanna, once alive, once dead. And please notice that the dead one is larger. This is similar to this that I showed before already. Live and dead. The dead is larger. Also, Dumuzi in the Akkadian seal, smaller, live, and larger, dead. So what about the element in the center? It could be interpreted in two ways. One is that this is the baby on its mother's knees, and another one that it is an embryo actually, and these are the legs of the woman. Some parallels to the first option, and other parallels to the second option. In both cases, we are dealing here with fertility. But fertility and death. As we see in a rock engraving from Wadi Weber, which is in Sinai, but just south of Elat, this was interpreted as a birth-giving woman. But this is not the case, because if we put it upside down, we see a woman in kind of a one position, will emphasize the vulva, indicating fertility, emphasize fertility, but with the head down means combination of death and fertility. This we also see in this Matzeva shrine or Sandington shrine in the valley. We have three like these in the same region. A broad stone that represents a goddess. Narrow stones represent the gods. We have here grinding stones You see here the C14 dates. The stone was in use for cards for about 4,000 years. And you can imagine, based on texts from the Hittite Empire, from Acadia, and from Egypt, that women used to come to the goddess living in the stone and doing a ceremony for ensuring fertility of the ground, which is also a feminine entity, by using these grinding stones. And also in the Bible, we have the same complaint of Jeremiah on the people of Jerusalem that are doing the same ceremony as we know from other texts. So back to this, what we see here is a combination of life and fertility, dealing with a cyclical idea like life and fertility, which is quite strong in the desert, more than in the fertile lands. It actually appeared first in the desert in the 6th millennium BC. We know it from other sites, and then much later adopted also by the further. Last point. Since the engraving from Mukta Valley is so unique, it is possible that the artist from Mukta Valley of the 6th, 4th millennium BC took a course in the CCSP or in Ireland, as we see here. But it is also known, the style is known from other cultures, some of them certainly familiar to you, which also might come from body painting, as we see here. Altogether, in this side and this side, we see a discussion of people with the idea of cyclical conception of life and death, which is again typical to the desert. That's all.
Thank you, Dr. Abner. Very interesting presentation, like always. Now there are questions from the audience.
Question from the audience. No questions so far.
Well, I have raised my hand.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, question. These are, this overview which you present. So you have these constructions, or if you like, geoglyphs, so to say. How do you think the people in the past sort of, conceived, because they can't see that overview. How do people in the past sort of relate to that? So they're creating these things. How did they do it? How did they perceive it? Does this say something about the audience, perhaps?
I admit that all my attempts to interview the people who did it failed, but I guess that they did it as a part of a kind of ceremony that deal with fertility and death. It is very hard for me to say further than this. Even with what I showed now, you can argue.
Okay, but what about the actual, because the actual arrangement of the figures?
Understand the question?
To repeat this last question.
What about the actual arrangement of the figures?
The arrangement. Two figures above an animal, which is connected to female fertility. One with the head up, alive, one with the head down, dead, symbolizing the cycle of life and death, with fertility, which is the embryo or a child. This is a combination that they see, but it is totally permitted to see different things in the same one.
Thank you.
There are other questions?
No, here it's all.
Okay, in this case, I call the next speaker, Marisa Giorgi, who will present a community or representation of self, hands and feet in rock art. Please, Marisa.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, perfectly.
I'm sharing my screen now. Okay, so okay. So community or representations of self, hands and feet in rock art. Is it letting me change the slide? There we go. Are the existence of foot and hand depictions in rock art around the world indicative of an archetypal use of the motif? So this doesn't suggest an equal ontological view or socio-cultural role of the symbol. Here's a lovely photo of Cueva de los Manos, a magnificent site in Argentina with lots of hand stencils, beautiful setting. So rather the symbols themselves, in being representational of hand and foot, may point towards an associated use of marking of place or more personalized or ritualistic role called proprio-performative. The motif's distribution in many countries around the world and temporally indicates a socio-ritualistic importance with at least some shared elements of creation and use. This paper also focused on representations of feet and hand figures in Carnarvon Gorge in Australia, and draws on examples from a few other places such as the Americas as a basis of contrast and comparison. Well, they take the form of hand stencils that are termed negative handprints, and also positive ones that are created by printing from the hand, sometimes even decorated, as you can see in the bottom right corner from the Canyonlands National Park in USA, and also in Central Australia in the Levy Range. There's also engraved hands and feet. Due to their less individually representational forms, they're not focused on as much. There's finger fluted from Gargas and Rovignac, and painted and drawn representations. And these are found in all sorts of locations such as caves, shelters, and open-air sites. The process of stenciling is generally carried out by mixing pigments such as ochre clay and charcoal with water or saliva in the mouth and spitting or blowing the mixture onto a surface of rock to create the negative image of a body part or an object. There are some variations in the application with cultural groups involving different admixtures such as orchids and blood, and application processes such as using a tube for blowing. The most common stencil in Australia and internationally is the hand stencil. The hand and foot images and stencils range from just the tiny imprint of a few digits to a whole body stencil. So this one here is from Tombs, which regionally is quite close, and there are at least 11 whole human stencils in Australia. Only a couple of them are adults though. Whether they're first created through cultural diffusion or impulsive behaviour, they're found around the world. Some famous sites include the French sites of Rovignac in Dordogne, Cosquer, dating from around 7,000 years ago, and Chauvet. An example from Portugal of just the paint imprints is Pego da Reina. And in Spain, which has some of the oldest stencils from 37.3 thousand years ago, you've got El Castillo. The Americas, of course, have several sites, including the famous Cueva de los Manos, Mayan sites, Valle Grande in Bolivia, Semiola Canyon, and Central Montana, where Greer and Kaiser have done a lot of work. And of course, places like North Africa, where Le Calec has done work as well. In Australia, there are many compositional sites with compositional content, as well as singular examples, such as Carnarvon Gorge, the Palace, Kakadu, New South Wales, and the Kimberley region. Near Australia is the oldest hand stencil in the world. Currently, it's in Maros, Sulawesi, in Indonesia, with an age of 39.9 thousand years ago, which is amazing. That's down in the bottom corner there. So Carnarvon Gorge, the site itself, is known in Bidra as Kuramandinji, and it's located in south central highlands of Queensland. Apart from stencils, there's lots of engraved feet and hand figures as well. And culturally, Carnarvon Gorge is identified as country by the Karingbal and Bidjara Indigenous groups. Other groups, such as the Brown River people, the Kari, Nuri, Longabula, the Waja and the Yimam, also identify with the gorge. So Carnarvon Gorge is seen largely as a gathering place for several different language groups. This was one of my favourite sites in Carnarvon Gorge, and unfortunately it was largely destroyed by the fires of December 2018. It depicts stencils of hands and axes, which are called balloon. The quantitative and relational aspects of hands and foot images found in Carnarvon Gorge offer new insights into their use in the area, but also internationally. Given this area benefits from contemporary Indigenous connections, some elements of interpretation can be obtained. The paper also looked at the broader question of whether ethnographic interpretations from one continent can offer insights into sites in another continent with unrelated cultural expression. Handprints have been considered as signatures when ethnographically there's members of a community who can recognise individual authors in the rock art. Stenciled feet can also act as signatures, and there seems to be more in Australia than in other countries. During the work in the Kimberley, there's an ethnographer called Elkin who was informed by members of the tribe that they could instantly recognise any particular hand stencils author, which is amazing. So 78% of stencils at the art gallery are hand stencils and 94% at Cathedral Cave, with a preference for left-handed stencils with a ratio of 70:30 for the art gallery and 65-35% at Cathedral Cave. As such, left hands in both Carnarvon Gorge and internationally have a higher incidence in stencils. Gargas has 86% left hands. This is probably due to right-handedness rather than symbolism. In Carnarvon Gorge, single hand stencils are sometimes situated on the approach to a site. Many of these have the role of signalling motifs to indicate the type of site you're about to approach, to understand whether certain behaviour or cultural protocols are to be observed before approaching, let's say, a burial site. Sometimes the locations are a bit difficult to reach, and that might be due to changes in the ground levels, but mainly due to the ingenuity of the artists by either climbing up or using large tree limbs to get at the areas they want to stencil. There's children's stenciled hands and feet, which you can see on this picture, and often at heights. And children's hands are also found in Gargas and Hoffignac, supporting the idea that the children were assisted in the process. Superimpositions of hand motifs can either be incidental or communicative. And in Carnarvon Gorge, these four images of hands with forearms are said to represent the alliances between different language groups in the gorge, using the gorge. This indicates a use of superimposition to establish cultural connectivity and the sharing of the use of the gorge, as you can see in the images. There's examples in other countries, such as Pueblo de los Manos. And it's hard to establish whether stenciled compositional elements are contemporaneous or they're created at different times, which doesn't really take away from the composition. An example is found on the bottom right there in a cascade of red hands around an opening interpreted as a vulva form at the art gallery site. I find that an intriguing composition. And those around a burial niche set high on the wall in Cathedral Cave, the image above. There's also many cases of framing, such as the hand stencil in a man-made depression in the lower photo that you can see. So Carnarvon Gorge is one of the places that has engraved stencil motifs with 6 digits, which I find fascinating. So ethnographically, there are many cases of 6 digits on hands and feet within the community. And this is recorded also on a historical postcard that's found at the State Library of Queensland, showing a community member with 6 fingers. There are 4 families with this propensity in the region. This trait's also been used to put forward native title claims for the land in the area, which included stencils with 6 fingers, therefore suggestive of direct genetical connections to the stencil art, to that of the descendants with the same trait. Ethnographic research indicates too that this is a regional signature for the Bidjara in the rock art, especially in relation to the engraved feet depicted with 6 toes. There are many examples of extra digits or polydactylism in cultures in other countries, such as Chaco Canyon in the USA and all the way down to Argentina. Some communities have genetic propensity for this anatomical feature. In other cases, it's due to pressures of genetic diversity within the population. Given that spiritual beings in a number of cultures are on occasion depicted with polydactyl hands, it is likely that this anatomical anomaly is not necessarily viewed in a negative light. Conversations with the Bidjara community have indicated that from a contemporary view, these individuals are seen with additional respect and on occasion extra powers. So such as in Magnificent Cave here up in Cape York with Nujakura, the medicine man, and the 6-fingered hand of a Guion on Jar Island in Kimberley. And Pueblo ethnographic research by Crown in America also reflected a higher perception of status for individuals with polydactylism. There are cases of people also missing or having damaged fingers through accidents and disease and cultural mutilation. The removal of digits has occurred culturally in countries such as America and Australia. And in Australia, the practice is very regionally variable. Quinnell, who studied Carnarvon Gorge, only found 2 possible hand mutilations in Carnarvon Gorge in the rock art, the rest being hand manipulations. The majority of stencils originally thought to depict missing fingers have achieved this through bending of fingers. At Maltravieso, Ripoll and Lopez et al. Undertook an exhaustive study which definitively concluded that there were no mutilations in the stenciled hands in Maltravieso. Pet feet are iconic to the panoramity tradition within Australia and represent an early spread of rock art in Australia, but are also present in later styles. Carnarvon Gorge has a large number of feet engravings, as you can see in that top image, compared to other engraved areas of Australia. Some are present also extending below the ground, which indicates an early use of the symbol as well. As mentioned before, the symbol, especially exhibiting polydactylism, can even translate as a regional marker for the Bidjara. Foot engravings are found in many countries, as you can see from these images. Here is an interesting hand engraving, which was engraved directly on top of a hand stencil at the art gallery site. You can also see some emu eggs up in the top left-hand corner and a vulva form to the left. The use of modified digit expression in rock art appears to achieve the codification of symbolic meaning. This is supported by a wide use of sign language in Indigenous Australia and the possible codification then transferring onto the rock art. One such series of handprints is found at the art gallery site on your top right there. And this has been interpreted by an Indigenous representative as meaning the death of many children. So the first hand with the bent little finger symbolises death. The second is a rigor mortis hand of a dead child. And the last meaning many. Elements of this interpretation have been contested by members of other language groups. Morwood, Leroy Gorin and Wolf were confident that the manipulations of fingers in stenciling were for the purpose of coded information, such as that evident in sign language. You can see in Roth's table there from 1897. This was considered both gestural but also imitative. So you can see down at the bird's head stencil. Recent studies by linguists such as H. Pare point to sign language for European examples as well. Many cultures use sign language in addition to spoken language in different circumstances. So Native American tribes have used sign language to communicate with different language groups and often use at times when speech is forbidden, such as during silent rituals or periods of mourning, hunting and traditional storytelling as well. The use of sign language during hunting or periods of enforced silence was widespread throughout Aboriginal Australia. Of course, the procurement of ochres and colour use is culturally significant. There are some fascinating stories about the journeys and rituals involved in some of the ochre sources. The modern performative art creation, both on rock and within contemporary expression, can be viewed as a continuation of this cultural expression, especially with community involvement. Dale Harding, who created that picture down there, creates this out of using culturally safe practices, so by consulting elders. Culture continues and cannot be frozen in time. So beyond the proprio performative, the hand and footprints appear to embody elements of community expression and meaning. De Brez's brilliant paper of 2013 on proprio performatives discusses hand images as a combination of a sense of ownership with the act of communication, such as territorial markers, as well as symbols of self. The signalling stencils, which are such as warnings of approaching sites, are likely to have a very low proprio performative impetus, given that they are driven primarily by communicative agendas. Whereas ritualistic or bereavement stencils embody a direct expression of self in connection to the act. The large panels or palimpsests, which you can see down the bottom there, embody both and offer a strengthening bond of cultural identity and continuation of culture in the visible addition to the whole. Engraved hands and feet are less of an expression of self and not considered proprio performative, though the act of engraving can in itself be viewed as a performative action. Moore listed the use of hand stencils as individual signatures, memorialization, the address to ancestor spirits, communication, historical records, storytelling, totemic ancestor prints. But to that, I'd like to add also regional boundary markers and connection between groups. Were some of these depictions of early political contracts, like the four forearms that we saw there? As such, hand and foot motifs could have fallen into one of these categories or many of the categories, given that rock art has multiple uses, multiple levels of understanding, and it's not temporally static. These regional projections of corpses and motifs can also be observed in the Americas as well, such as the regionally distinct handprints we saw before from the Canyonlands. So contemporary Indigenous cultural insights into rock art meaning are invaluable in this sort of research. With cultural specificity taken into consideration, we can still observe what appears to be diverse use of hand and foot motifs in Carnarvon Gorge and internationally as both proprio performative and representational of a wider symbolic motive use. I'd like to thank the kind assistance of the Bidjara and Caringbale community for helping me understand cultural aspects of the Carnarvon Gorge rock art. Thank you. I'll unshare.
Thank you, Marisa, for your presentation. Very interesting. Now, the paper is open for discussion. There are questions? I have a question for you. Footprints are very common in rock art, and but they are normally considered as something related to worshipping or to sacrality or initiation. It depends on the images toward which the footprints are directed. you told us a different story. You considered the images of feet the same with the same meaning of those of hands. Did I understand correctly?
Well, that was in a broad sense. In Carnarvon Gorge, it's more of a memorialization of the act. They've got a slightly different use, and they're more often in Carnarvon Gorge, they're more often children's footprints than adult ones. So they could also be initiation, but they're usually younger footprints. There's also adult ones, but more so handprints are used in initiation sites. So adolescent handprints are used at sites where people are progressing through the different stages of initiation.
Thank you. There are other questions?
Yes, we have a question from the Centro Camuro. Mila,
yes.
Marte Abreu is going to ask the question.
So my question was, Marisa, my question is in relation to sex. If you might any, if you have any data about if they are female or male.
No. So there has been some contested research on whether motifs are male or female. I think it's due to the sampling. So when research has been done on whether a hand stencil is male or female, the population sampled may not be representative of the community that is being studied.
Well, because, you know, as you know, both in the cave art and in other places, there's quite lots of information about that. They're being measured. And in fact, in the cave art is 50-50. 50 male, 50 female. Sharp published quite a lot on this, so if you're interested.
Yes, but wasn't there some contention between the population?
Well, he doesn't have the population in the case of the caves, so it was...
No, but the sample population used, I thought there was a little bit of contention there as to whether it's representational, because it was from one ethnicity, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I cannot tell you exactly if it is like that. It's a bit.
I think it would be a very interesting study, and I don't think anyone's done that yet, Mila. So I think you should come to Australia and do it.
The ones that were made were especially in the cave art, and the ones in several areas, sites. And yes, they also found that, for example, they have children. And in fact, the earliest ones that you have of handprints in Europe are female children, not male.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. That's really interesting, yeah.
James, you have a question.
Yeah, firstly, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation, Marisa. I see it's 2:50 a.m. over there. So well done. But just a general question, what sort of scope do you see for expanding the study in perhaps in terms of, we have this sign language and you've talked about the different language groups. This could be quite interesting to explore, how it varies or doesn't vary in different groups, and to try and thereby deepen understanding of say Australian rock art.
Yeah, unfortunately, for the Carnarvon Gorge area, the use of sign language is no longer evident in the community. But there are other Indigenous groups, especially in the north and west of the country, but they're completely different culturally. So it's really hard to make these comparisons. We often look at Australia as a homogenous group when there's so many different cultures and language groups. But as you said, that will give insights into the sign language. And given that some of the older Indigenous people I've talked to could supposedly see some sign language within that, such as the figure for death, but then I'm not even sure if that's just in context of those other symbols. Like, would that symbol then mean something else in a different context? So there's probably quite a lot of complexity in it. But as you said, yes, researching other populations will probably give insights that still use a bit of sign language.
But also clarifying that research question you just stated there, that some things are sign language, some things aren't, and trying to pick this apart and work backwards, so to say. This could also be quite interesting.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. But I think definitely going deeper into the sign language aspect. I mean, you've got some older ethnographic records like Roth's table there of the sign language from when he was around. But that was, again, that was from a northern language group. It wasn't from that area. And thank you for your talk. It was very interesting as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. I understood that the last speaker is not present, nor is connected. Andrzej Swastika. Unless there is someone who is speaking on his behalf, I declare the session closed and leave the word to Angelo and Mila. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you.
So I'm speaking here on the behalf of the Scientific Council of the Center, and Andrew as president of the FRAU. Both of us, I think I can share this with Andrew. We are extremely pleased to have the opportunity to be around with friends and colleagues from around the world in these 4 days. All of us around the world know how difficult and problematic these last months have been. Most of us cannot, like Marisa, cannot leave the country. And so I can first think to show this as a sign that yes, rock art research continues. We will continue to do our work even if the times were complicated and difficult. And the Valcamonica Symposium has been a point of reference for exchanging ideas from colleagues from around the world and from so different backgrounds as Australia or Africa or America. And once more, we prove that it is possible to have very interesting debates, different ideas and confrontations. And this is what will move on in our field of research. I would like to, if you will agree, to extend an applause to the wonderful team of the center as usual. Most of you that are here in the room saw the young group of students from Milano University that was with us, and of course the team of the center. The ones that are around the world via Zoom didn't have this opportunity, so I would like to ask you to remember a bit their names. So of course nothing of this would be possible without of course the help and the support at all levels that we had from the director of the center. This is Tiziana Cittadini, Angelo Fossati, that is near me, the president of the Centro, Federico Trolletti, Marisa George, that is in Australia, Paolo Medici, and Negev Pezzoni. All the work that has been done at the technical level is Matteo, and the direction of the behind the internet, and she's not here with us but in another room, and this is Valeria. You know, this is difficult to summarize and to make and to talk a bit about all the sections that we had. We spoke about so many different things. We run to different chronological periods. We debate so many different subjects, and this is what really rock art is. We always like to remember that it's not only the first, it's what makes us humans, the production of art. And if there's something that unites us around the world, is for sure rock art. And once more, I think we prove it. Building a meeting like this in these very difficult times, at the support of so many of other colleagues that are not here, and that you probably didn't notice that they were behind this, that it is in fact a scientific group, the scientific committee that took the time to select, to read, to debate, to comment the different proposals that were sent to us. So my word of thanks to them from around the world. I'm not going to say their name because it's a long list, but we have people from Brazil and from the United States, from Australia, from Tanzania. Hopefully you will have soon in your hands the volume that it was produced. The center had always this tradition of producing almost immediately, if not on the spot like this time, the proceedings of their meetings. And this is something, Mark, something that I think we should remember how important it is sometimes. Usually when you go to meetings, they say, oh, we will publish the proceedings, then they will come out 2 or 3 years later. The center, usually keeps the promise of publishing immediately. In fact, the volume is published. It didn't reach our hands because we are in a long holiday in Italy because of the old stands. And so this is the reason why physically I don't have it with me, but it already exists. I can guarantee it to you. And so it will be sent to all of you around the world that participate. But it will be also, there will be also available an ebook. So the ones that don't have the physical printed book will have the opportunity to have it also in the not printable edition. And of course, we use a fantastic tool that most of us didn't knew that exists till 1.5 years called Zoom. It makes it possible to be all together in different parts of the world. And also the fact that we were transmitting live in the Facebook, and we have a channel in YouTube. And I can guarantee you that this is extremely important. I think this is the future, because not everybody can be in the Congress, physically. Not everybody can listen on the spot, no? And not everybody has the possibility of having even internet. But this fact that you will stay available on the Facebook and you will be in YouTube, this is for me fundamental, because it will make us reach so many people that we cannot imagine. And I can tell you that, for example, we had already more than 200 people watching the first session. This gives you an idea how powerful this technology is, and we should probably, use it often or use it more. Because not everybody is in Europe, not everybody has a good library nearby, not everybody has the same access that some of us have. And so, I think this is a very important point. The Centro Comune is making an effort to, as you know, keep following these new technologies. We've been having talks live at least 1 month or every 2 months. And we have a Facebook, and we will make in a way that some of what we do is available for all of you. But, since I'm one of the ones that belongs to the generation that grew up in the center, I arrived here to Valcamonica in 1977. I can tell you that I think the most important thing for us is to continue the work, of course, of our honorary president, Emanuele Natti. And this means to train, to produce, and to also continue working all over the world. These new technologies also are an open door to have more people interested in rock art, and especially in the case of the center, to have more people that can participate in our work. We need you. We are an association, so we need to have members. We need to have people that reach to us and come to see Valcamonica, come to our field schools. And the Valcamonica Symposium was one of the many activities that as Centro we do. You know, near me is Professor Angelo Fossati. As you know, the Centro Comune belongs to a larger network called IFRAO, the International Federation of Rock Art Organization. And so I would like him to say some words on as president of IFRAO.
On behalf of IFRAO, the International Federation of Rock Art Organization, that represents like 60, I think, associations in the world. I must say thanks to the president, the collective, and the director, Siana Cittadini, and the member staff of Centro Comune, for this beautiful opportunity to participate in the Valcamonica Symposium that has been always in these 28 years using this Valcamonica Symposium, a real gem for our scholar rock art community. And yeah, we had very good sessions. I think very open in general, not only based on Valcamonica, but comparing and discussing also our sites. And this for sure is maybe suggestion for the next session will be to encourage the visit of the rock art site, because we have been in one very wonderful evening, night presentation, but I think maybe people is coming to Valcamonica to see the rock art. So I suggest maybe in the next Valcamonica Symposium we can encourage to and see more sites. And what else? Mila already has said everything. Yes, thank you to all the organizers, and I think that in a few months we will receive the proposal for the next conference. So we will see where, how, and when. So we don't know yet, but I know from the governor the proposal is coming out. So this will be important for our local community, because it's time. Now that we can travel soon, at least, we hope that the next congress will be soon available. Thank you very much.
Would it be possible to distribute the email addresses of the participants?
You know that now this is an important question. Why we don't, as usually used to be, publish the emails? Because there's a very strict law now in Europe about personal data. But in the book, in the proceedings, the authors themselves use the address. You understand? So it's a bureaucratic thing. We cannot give any more addresses of people according to the European law. But in the book, in the proceedings will be there. So themselves will give you the address, their own address. Okay, I would say that thank you and arrivederci.